Bacteriophages are viruses. If the humans are infected by different viruses, this virus infects bacteria and replicates in bacteria. This phenomena was invented by Tworth in UK. However, couldn't study it because its inventor and further developer is recognized as Felix Derrel. After meeting with Derrel, George Eliava was very interested with this innovation because he independently from him identified in river quarries the same phenomenon. An unknown agent was destroying bacteria of cholera. Eliava understood that it was common phenomena. Nevertheless, he did not continue the research and went to Paris, where he met Felix Derrel, who not only identified phenomena but already studied the methods of investigating this phenomenon. The institute was established in 1923. It was under the Georgian State Health Commissariat. The institute was established by Professor George Eliava. In 1920, George Eliava was sent to Paris Pasteur Institute, where he met Felix Derrel, who was French-Canadian. He is a recognized scientist and inventor of bacteriophage phenomenon. In 1934, Derrel visited Tbilisi, as he had an idea of establishing a center that would have provided complete research of bacteriophage phenomenon. He met George Eliava and jointly with him worked out proposal on establishing in Tbilisi not only institute but clinics where should have been tested bacteriophages on humans, because he understood that his invention might have been very useful for human health in fight against infectious diseases. His idea was following: our enemy's enemy is our friend. Our enemy was bacteria that infected humans, and the bacteriophages were viruses that destroyed them, and they might have been used in fight against them. Derrel was often traveling. In India he tried to use bacteriophages for different purposes, and not only for treatment humans, but used them in environment, in fighting against vibrions of cholera. He used to put bacteriophage in the wells and thought that in such a way he could destroy the bacteria causing diseases. He established the enterprise for production of bacteriophage and used to send them to different countries. Most of all, he liked Soviet governance. He thought the Soviet Union is the only country where even the science is under the state control, and had been sending bacteriophage free of charge for treatment of infectious diseases like dysentery and so on. The idea of establishing center was discussed in the Republic, and as I have studied from my colleagues, Eliava went to Moscow, where he had met Sergei Orjonikidze, and with his support they studied the construction of the institute. However, the project was not fully implemented. Has been started construction of the institute that should study problem of bacteriophage without clinics. On January 23, 1937, Eliava was arrested and he died in the prison. I will speak about tragedy of George Eliava's life. George Eliava was arrested in January 23, 1937. The verdict was made by Soviet Political Bureau on July 26, 1937. Formally, materials for review has been submitted to the Board of Judges of the Soviet Union's Supreme Military Court, that was obliged to confirm the Politburo's penalty, shooting. Should be mentioned that neither in Eliava's dossier nor in Tbilisi and Moscow archives was not the documents on executing the penalty of shooting. However, in 11 July 1937, the Georgian newspaper Communist informed the society that scientist Eliava was providing dreadful vermin actions against people. The style is followed. As regarding Felix Darrell, he was charged as a spy and had not led in the Soviet Union. Because of that, idea was significantly reduced. However, the activities on problem continued, as the applied studies on bacteriophages led by Georgian Eliava started since 1926. Later, the studies continued in Moscow and other cities of the Soviet Union, but the main center of research on bacteriophages was in Tbilisi. In 1938, construction of building of the institute finalized, and Institute of Bacteriophages and Microbiology and Epidemiology were united in one institute, Institute of Microbiology, Epidemiology and Bacteriophages, or shortly IMEB. The IMEB was existing under the Georgian state until 1950s. Since 1950s, the institute is under the jurisdiction of the Soviet Union's Ministry of Health. Since that period, the institute became main center for the theoretical and practical decisions of the problem. That was center where all problems regarding bacteriophages should have been confirmed. All plans and activities were designed in Tbilisi Institute for further dissemination and practical application of creating treatment preparations. The centers were established in Kharkov, Ufa, Gorky and Khabarovsk, where was only the production of preparations. However, theoretical and practical invention of preparation has been provided in Tbilisi Institute. We provided them with technology and phage preparations for further production for the entire territory of the USSR. Outside the Soviet Union, interest towards bacteriophages reduced, as it was identified that often bacteriophages are only active on locally separated microorganisms and may not be active on wider territory. That time were invented chemical preparations, sulfadine, etc. Later were invented antibiotics. Production of antibiotics was massive and well organized on a wide scale and with a huge industry. That is why bacteriophages were used relatively seldom. That was Soviet Union, where they were still used for preventive purposes. There were prepared bacteriophage preparations in tablets. In case of spreading intestinal diseases, they were sending their preparations to them, and for the reduction of epidemiological situation until 1930s and later. Later, scientists identified that antibiotics do not impact diseases because microorganisms as live organisms are transforming and becoming resistant to antibiotics. That is why pharmaceutical companies had to create new varieties of preparations that need big investments. However, its technology enables its easy standardization and big amount of production. The industry became multi-billion and competed with bacteriophages that was produced in relatively small amounts. Further to our experience, antibiotics and bacteriophages may be used jointly, as in case of infections of antibiotics, bacteriophages may substitute them, or vice versa. The union has high efficiency. Nowadays, world re-established its interest towards bacteriophages because they may be used as one of the alternatives that might become perspective on the background of wide spreading of infections. This might be used as a tracers in identification of spreading of bacteria and in marine environment. Once in Batumi we provided research on an issue. They can easily signed, and as they have very typical behavior, they could be easily identified from other bacteria. With those bacteriophages, we were trying to identify dissemination of infectious bacteria in the sea and find out that the infectious bacteria could be spread on long distance. In 1957 there was big snow in Georgian district of Georgia, where occurred big epidemic spread of dysentery disease, where in one night there were 270 persons infected. That might have been a waterborne infection. Later we find out that a water pipeline was damaged and it sucked infected water from uphill, where lived a family that had open toilet, and as we identified later, he was not only ill with dysentery but was chronic carrier of disease. Wider use of antibiotics destroy not only pathogenic microorganisms but microorganisms those are useful for humans and supports in the fight against other microorganisms that cause dysbacteriosis. It means that those normal microorganisms are destroyed, and on this background are developed microorganisms that cause harmful diseases. As they are resistant to antibiotics, methods of their treatment is complicated. That is why bacteriophages still have big perspectives. However, it needs comprehensive research.